Hey everyone, and welcome back to Game Talk Radio. I'm Greg, and there is no Jen because today I'm just talking about some E3 stuff. So Jen's at work, and I'm not today. So I've been watching a lot of the E3 press conferences, and I watched Sony's last night. It's Tuesday afternoon here, and I really just wanted to get an idea of what. Or I shouldn't say an idea of what I wanted to come out to you guys and just throw out kind of my feelings, my thoughts on the Sony press conference. I'm going to do this with a couple of the other press conferences, so feel free to listen to those or to check those out as well. But the Sony one was my most anticipated one. And all E3 already, we've had people, I've heard people online and in person commenting about how lame they kind of think E3 is already. Now, one thing you have to remember about E3, though, this was actually Monday morning. People were telling me this yesterday. And one thing you have to remember about E3 is that technically it doesn't really start until, well, I guess you would say Monday, but almost Tuesday during the day, because that's when the actual show floor is open and there's a lot of great stuff coming out. But Sony usually does their press conference Monday night. And in the past, Microsoft has followed suit either before Sony or the day after. And so I had a few people that were disappointed, saying they were like, well, I don't know, E3 is still a ways off. Or it doesn't feel like a really good E3 to me this year. And I think a lot of us have really high expectations. So I was telling everybody yesterday, just wait till Sony. We got to see what Sony does to know or not. Plus Nintendo was at 11 o'clock today. So you have to really know what those guys did before you can say it's like, it's a lame E3 or it's a bummer E3. So that being said, I'm going to go into the Sony press conference, and I didn't really take any notes. I watched it live last night. I've watched some more footage and some recap stuff today, so I'm just going to kind of go over it as I remember it and kind of tell you about the things that stuck out to me, the things that bothered me, and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not really big on grading systems, so I don't throw out a grade like, I got an A minus or a B plus. I mean, who cares? That's all subjective. Just like game reviews, I think, are kind of silly to put a number on it. But what I would say about the Sony press conference, and I say this as somebody who, quote unquote, would be a Sony guy, is that I was actually disappointed. Now, is that a part of me having such high expectations, or is it a part that this show wasn't as good as their previous E3s have been? I think it's a little bit of both. I think that a couple years ago, Sony came out just swinging when they talked about Final Fantasy VII and Last Guardian, and they had all this great stuff. Like it was just like one after another. Just Shenmue 3 Kickstarter, boom, boom, boom. And so like they've had like Sony's always been known for like these holy crap moments. And I was expecting something very similar. In fact, I was also thinking of some crazy stuff. Like I was actually going on a limb and saying I think they might release or announce a Vita 2. Like they might actually come out with a new PlayStation handheld to something to combat the Switch, something like that, and or at least, this, that, and the other thing. After watching the press conference, it started off, so this, I'm just kind of going in order. So it starts off like they always do. There's some kind of weird thing going on. It's like a stage show, and they open with some God of War gameplay, and it looks really good. Like, I like God of War, and I've always liked them, and I also am a fan of sequels that take place years after the original game, and I was kind of getting sick of all the God of War prequels. So excellent. We'll start with some God of War gameplay. It looks really cool. I don't know how I necessarily like the idea of you dragging that kid around the whole time, but I definitely like the idea of a new God of War game that pushes Kratos to the future, and we get to see more about him. So that's cool. I'm looking at that and go, okay, that's cool. And then they kind of switch over and they show an extended gameplay footage of Days Gone, which is the new game from Bend. And these guys, it basically looks and feels almost like an Uncharted Last of Us kind of game. It's a zombie. This is like a single-player story-driven zombie game, but it's got a lot of open-world elements. I think you're going to be able to travel open-world, almost like GTA, but also and have to take over camps. I think it's going to have a very traditional, almost like Horizon Zero Dawn has a very traditional open-world scheme, like an Assassin's Creed type. It's going to be similar to that, I think, where you can actually take over outposts and stuff like that. I mean, we'll have to see, obviously, when we know more details. But that, I watched that, and it looks awesome. I mean, the game looked awesome when I saw it last year, though. So it is kind of what it is. But I don't want to get too hung up on bashing them for showing us cool stuff, right? So anyway, I thought it was very cool. The game looks good. They showed some interesting things with the zombies, like how you use them to your advantage. So he like blows open a hole in the wall, and all these zombies flood in and start attacking the guys, and he goes and rescues his friend. Very cool stuff. I like that. That's fun. And then, but it's something we saw last year, so you're kind of waiting for like the, oh crap, what's going to happen? And then So then they roll into the. Okay, let me get to this real quick. So what I will say is I love how Sony handles their presentations. Like, main guy comes out, says, "Listen up, everybody. Here's the thank you for coming to the Sony press conference. We're going to talk about some games. Here you go." And then he gets off the stage, and then they just kind of talk about games for a lot longer, and that's what I actually care about. That's what I prefer. So we're going through all this stuff, and then they show off clearly right away. I knew what it was, Monster Hunter. And so I'm getting really excited because I'm like, holy crap, Monster Hunter on PS4, like this is a really big deal. It hasn't been on a Sony console for many years. Capcom and Sony had kind of a falling out when Monster Hunter was on the PSP and how they wanted to handle the online infrastructure and stuff. So that was really cool to me that they've somehow repaired that relationship, and they're kind of taking Monster Hunter into the new generation. They're taking Monster Hunter out of its, oh, here's how you load into an area, you have a set mission, set time limit, you have loading zones. It seems like they're kind of throwing all that away and making an open world Monster Hunter game. Now, will that game be good? I won't know until I play it. But if the combat's the same and I can team up with 3 of my buddies and run around and kill monsters and make better armor off the stuff I carve off them, that's all I really need. So Monster Hunter World was announced, and I was like out of my mind. I was like, wow, this is finally like Sony's ramping up. You're like, in the beginning they were like, well, we don't want to get you too excited too fast. Let's ease you in and then slam it with a big one. And they did. Very happy. And then they rolled into I don't remember the exact order, but then they showed off a remake of Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus is an amazing game on PS2, and then they did an HD port to PS3, so it cleaned up the game a little bit. But this is a full-blown remake, so they've completely redrawn and retextured the game, so everything looks amazing, everything looks great. But it's kind of a game that's already out. It's not like something like Last Guardian where we weren't even sure if it was even existing anymore. So there's that. Not a big deal. Not ragging on them for it. But it looks very cool, and I'm excited about it. But it is something we've kind of already seen. So it kind of, I was still kind of riding the hype train. So I was Monster Hunter, that I'm riding it. They show a trailer. They show some gameplay footage of Detroit, which is the new game from the guys that make Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls and Indigo Prophecy and Omicron. And it looked really, really good. But again, we talked about this last year, right? So I kind of feel like where is the wow factor from Sony, because they almost always have it. I felt that a little bit with Monster Hunter, like they gave me a taste of it, and then it kind of faded away. So then we're looking through all that, and they go onto like a VR binge, and they start showing a bunch of rapid fire VR games, and I'm not going to say they don't look cool, and I am very happy that they're still sticking to VR. Like, they know that VR is viable for them. They have people making new stuff. The guys that made Until Dawn, they're working on a couple of VR games, and I'm like, man, but I want you to make a sequel to Until Dawn because that game is really good. But they're working on some VR stuff, and so they show a bunch of VR stuff, which I'm not like the VR. It's okay, I guess. It's not my main concern. My main concern is more traditional games. And so we're watching all that sort of stuff, and then they go into, I'm trying to think what else they had after that. So they started to show some more stuff, and then they end the show essentially, well, and I should say this, they quote unquote end the show with Spider-Man, and there's just some really cool Spider-Man stuff, and I'm like, man, this is awesome. And I'm like waiting, and then that was like the end of it though. And I looked at the market; it was like 60 minutes is all they had done, and I was like, that's really short. Normally Sony does like an hour and a half, and it kind of floats over to 2 hours. Well, one thing I completely spaced and missed, I don't even know how I missed this, but Sony did like a pre-show where they announced a new trailer for Gran Turismo, and they kind of narrowed the window, and then they talked about other things. They opened the Sony press conference also talked about the new Uncharted expansion, and then they talked about the Horizon Zero Dawn expansions. But it's all kind of stuff that like we know about. So it's kind of waiting for this big, wow moment. And the Spider-Man footage was excellent, and I think that game's gonna be really, really good. But it was just Spider-Man footage. Another game that they announced before, so we're just seeing more of it. And most of the things they were talking about aren't coming out this year. So I actually feel that Sony was light this year. I don't think they had a lot to show in regards to other years, and I think our expectations were very, very high. So I don't think that Sony had a bad showing by any stretch, but was it worse than their last couple E3s? I have to say that, because they've always had some sort of like shocking punch you in the mouth moment, and that was not here. Like, there was no moment like that. Monster Hunter was for me, but I would say most people probably didn't feel that same way. I think what I noticed the most right away though was that there was a serious lack of indies. Normally now, and that's exactly what Microsoft did in their press conference. They were hitting like 20 games in a row. Where like, check out these darling little indie games that are coming to the Xbox, and Sony didn't have like this moment of check out all these amazing indies that are coming to PS4. So I don't know if they were planning on just showing that on the floor with a bunch of demo units. They weren't going to have it as part of the presentation, but that's something that Sony's always done. Like, they always brag about these great games they've got from these great indie developers, and it's pretty well known that the PlayStation's easier to develop for, and that the way Sony handles like their licensing fees and the way they help with people getting games on their system, it seems like it's a little more user friendly. So they typically get indies. They have a less abusive like publisher kind of system, I guess you would say. So and that's not a secret. That's just kind of how it's always been known to be. And Sony, I guess, this time for some reason they just didn't. Maybe they didn't have a lot to show, or maybe they didn't want to show anything that they didn't get to show first, which might also explain why Microsoft had so many to show. Maybe Microsoft went out and paid some money to these guys to say, hey, can we debut your game at our show or whatever, since they were coming first. Like, I don't know if that was Microsoft trying to one-up Sony or whatever. So all that's very, very interesting to me. But I was disappointed for multiple reasons. One, I feel like there wasn't like a super punch, like something you had to have. And I also felt like there wasn't, man, I don't know how to say it. Like, there just wasn't an indie presence. And then, of course, some of the things I anticipated, like maybe a new Vita or a new handheld or new hardware or something, nothing. They didn't announce a price drop on anything, even though this week you can get a PS4 for like $50 off, the new gold PS4. Yeah, there was a little bit of a disconnect there. I'm not disappointed by any stretch, but it definitely did not meet my expectations. Now, to be fair, were my expectations ridiculous? Most likely, because they've set such a high bar in the past. And so when they set a high bar, you kind of, you want to stay at that same bar. And Sony has kind of been setting the stage over the last couple of years of what an awesome E3 presentation looks like. And this year, I just don't think they lived up to previous expectations while still putting on a pretty good show. And they still have a great library. A lot of the stuff they showed that was quote-unquote exclusive is actually exclusive, unlike when Microsoft was talking about exclusives where they were both PC and Xbox games, or they were coming to PlayStation later. They were pretty loose with their definition of what exclusive is. But all in all, I still think it was an entertaining show. We always, every year, my friends and I, we get together at the store there, and then we actually watch the press conference live, and we kind of talk about it and hang out and stuff. And it was cool. So it was still a fun time. It was great, but it definitely was. I think it was lower. It was less entertaining than I thought it would be, I guess is the best way to say it. So either way, it was very interesting, but it is what it is, and it's over now. Sony's been showing off a lot of stuff today, though, and I'm hoping to see some really good Monster Hunter footage later. But that was kind of my impressions on the Sony press conference. This is kind of just a quick recap. I know I didn't cover everything, but this was more of a my impressions sort of video. And I'm gonna do the same thing now with a couple of the other ones we did, but it was interesting to me. I was thrown off by it. I was expecting more and got disappointed. And that's, there's a saying that you have in customer service and in other things in life, and it's always under promise and over deliver. So if you set your expectations at a medium level and then you overshoot them, people are left with this really great taste in their mouth. As opposed to if you promise them the world, or if people are expecting the world like I was and you don't get it, you almost feel let down, even though they didn't let me down. They had a really good show. It was a really entertaining show with lots of stuff to show off. But all in all, I thought Sony did a fine job. I think this E3 in general, though, after this, and I'll talk a little more about this on the Nintendo one, I think overall this E3 is very average. Not bad, not great. We're kind of in the middle of a system life cycle now, so there's no new hardware coming out, really. The Switch already came out. So really, it's only up to the games that have been in development for a couple years and the big companies fighting over exclusives and stuff like that. But that was but Sony did good. Not great. They did good. And all in all, it's still been an entertaining E3. It's still like, what I love about this time of year is it's for us. All the news media outlets, even big other non-gaming news outlets, will comment on things about E3. This is like our time to just be like knee-deep in rumors and all this other great stuff. So anyway, thanks everybody for watching as always, and you can always send us questions. You can follow me on Twitter at GameTradeGreg. I'm going to put this up on the Game Talk Radio page, which is probably where you're watching it now, since a lot of you guys come from the store links that I put in the Facebook page. But also check out the Have At You podcast that I do with some friends, and then we're also on a YouTube channel called The Drop Rate, which is a really fun channel. We do a lot of stuff on there besides the podcast. We do a bunch of other play videos, and I put my first 30s on there and stuff like that. But anyway, thanks everybody for listening and watching, and you have a great day.